everybody. Thank you for coming. Good evening, good afternoon if there are some of you that are jet lagged or recovering from last night still. But really glad to have you guys here. If you are here for a panel discussion around infusing customer obsession into your business strategy, you are in the right place. So you're starting out your day well. Really happy to be here. We'll introduce ourselves. We'll get right down to some content, and then we'll happy to hear from you all as well. My name is Lauren Detloff. I am the Chief Marketing and Growth Officer of Ollion. If you have not heard of Ollion, you are not alone. It's a relatively new company and brand, but not a new business. We recently formed through the integration and merger of 4 cloud-native businesses, longtime AWS partners, so now we're a global enterprise tech consultancy. If many of you in the room are familiar with Second Watch, that was one of those companies. Cloud Cover, Cloud Comrade were 2 of those other legacy businesses, and then a company called Aptiv, which was really strong in the data, AI, and insight space. So really happy to be here as Ollion Global Enterprise Tech Consultancy and some of our special guests and our clients. The purpose of today's session, before we introduce our panelists, was talking about this idea of customer obsession. So when we think about our clients and the work that we do, we really think about almost a little bit of a spectrum or maturity curve, if you will. There are companies that are using technology for technology's sake and technology outcomes. Maybe it's a little bit of an efficiency, maybe it's just a little bit of tweaking, getting the right tools in place, and that's okay. There are companies who are maybe a little bit further along on that journey, who are getting a little bit more customer focused and who are using technology to achieve business outcomes, whatever that might be, growth, decrease in processing times, whatever that might be, but that customer aware business focus. And then there are companies that are even further along in what we would call truly customer centric or truly customer obsessed. The ones that are not just using technology to drive outcomes for their customers and maybe even their customer's customer, but humanity as a whole. Is that bold? Maybe, but we'll talk a little bit about today. So we are very fortunate to have some people that can speak to all of those things in great depth, but especially I think have achieved great success in the use of cloud and AI and technology to be further along on that journey and truly trying to be truly are sort of customer obsessed. So we will introduce our very special panelists. So first to my left, Jeremy Campbell from SCOR Logica. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jeremy Campbell. I work for SCOR Global Life Americas. SCOR Global Life Americas is a subsidiary of SCOR SE, which is a very large reinsurance company, global reinsurer. And so what we do, my team, we actually work with direct insurers and help them in the evaluation process of applicants for life insurance. And we do it all in the cloud, electronically, and very quickly. And so I've been with SCOR for about 7 years, and we've been in the cloud the entire time that I've been there. In fact, Second Watch helped us in 2014 with our initial migration to the cloud.
And you guys are all in on AWS.
All in on AWS, exactly. We don't own, we were just chatting about it, I don't own a single piece of physical infrastructure. It's fantastic.
Nice, good. And next up, Christina Moss from Rockwell Automation.
Hi, I'm Christina Moss, Director of Cloud Services for Rockwell Automation. Rockwell is a very large global manufacturing company. My team, we do own a lot of infrastructure. We do own a lot of physical infrastructure. We don't. My team doesn't actually support it, but we are partner with those teams, and we'll be probably doing some migrations and a ton of work there. But we also have a lot of cloud as well, so it's a good balance of how we're managing things. But that's essentially it. We got a lot going on, a lot of demand, especially with a lot of data centers. We have a lot of demand for the cloud. So. Yes. And a lot of increasing demand, which is a lot of why we're here to continue to build and develop our journey here.
Yeah, lots to unpack, because you guys have similar in the sense they're legacy businesses that aren't known for being necessarily innovative or customer obsessed, but you're doing it from a heavy infrastructure point. You guys are a little bit more digital native, so it'll be interesting to unpack that a little bit. But last up, my colleague Vishal Parpia. Vish.
Hi, I'm Vishal Parpia. I am the co-founder of Cloud Cover, one of the businesses that has become part of Ollion. In Ollion, I am now the Chief Digital Officer, and I'm responsible for basically teasing out some of the accelerators that we can do through intellectual property to speed up migrations to the cloud, the utility of using the cloud, and kind of figuring out effectively how to really simplify the work that's necessary so that we can kind of focus on the business outcomes rather than the technical sort of back and forth that's necessary.
Good. So before we dive in, I have some questions prepared. We would love to also hear from you. We'll save time at the end for questions, but at any point, if you're really keen to chime in, just raise your hand. There are no handheld mics, so shout and we will repeat your question for you. But seriously, at any point, do that. But maybe just for us, it'd be helpful to know how many people in here are kind of leaning a little bit more toward that like business strategy. You really want to hear about the outcomes, sort of the good, okay? And then those of you on the flip side, super geeky, want to get into the tech, want to know what these guys are doing around the emerging technology, the bits and the bytes. Good, you're okay, welcome.
There's always that one guy.
We'll cover a little bit of both too, so excellent. Okay, well, cool. Thank you and welcome again, and thank you guys for your time, and thank you all for being here. Maybe just a quick one to kind of level set. You know, we're talking about infusing customer obsession. What does that actually mean? You know, Jeremy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, you know, one of the things you have to start with is who is the customer also, right? And so, you know, when you think about what customer obsession is, I mean, it really can manifest in a lot of different layers. So, for example, with us, we are a reinsurance company. We don't have a relationship with a direct insured person. But that doesn't mean they're not our customer in the end. Mm-hmm. You know, and the direct insurer is also not our only customer as well. We have internal teams that are our customers too. So really, I mean, it's really thinking about it from a mindset of how do you make things easy? How do you make things happen quickly? How do you take the burden out of it so that the business outcomes can be achieved without a lot of wrangling and a lot of difficulty that they have in the past?
Good. And Christina, what about with Rockwell? What does that mean to you? Customer obsessed.
I would say it's probably similar. Like we definitely have a lot of internal teams that we're servicing, so there's definitely work to kind of drive the business forward by supporting the internal teams. And then, you know, it's interesting because you don't really get to see a lot of, it's not as easy as to say like what we're doing today and like how it actually impacts the person on the other side. So really, it's kind of continue to drive building our business relationships so we can kind of get to that point of, all right, how does the thing that I'm doing today to help this application or, you know, build out the SaaS or whatever we're doing, how does that actually impact the customer? And making sure we're making the right decisions. Like, do we understand what the deliverables of the organization are? Do we understand what the goals are? And how are we helping to move the needle in that direction? And being really enabler instead of a roadblock.
Well, and I like your distinction between the internal customer obsession and the external, because it is important to think of it as both. We all have internal clients within our organization. And Vish, same question, or maybe on the flip side, like where do companies get it wrong when they think they're being customer obsessed?
Yeah, so, I mean, we used to work with a lot of cloud native businesses, digital native businesses that were just getting started on the public cloud or were already running at scale. At CloudCover, we worked with some of the largest unicorns in Asia Pacific. And what they got right was they put the customer at the front of all of the work that they were doing from the perspective of the application that they were delivering was the thing that the customer was coming to that business for. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, a lot of the metrics that we take as infrastructure, sort of like, you know, signals or whatever, are actually important from the perspective of seeing what that customer experience is and driving their behavior and, more importantly, perhaps delivering the value in a repeatable and scalable manner as these applications grew and became more valuable. A lot of them became, you know, super apps, doing everything from ride hailing to delivering food home, and actually selling insurance at the end of it. So it was really interesting to see how they evolved and the kind of information that they pulled out in order to be able to really drive the direction of their application on the back of what the customer was telling them. Where we've seen them get it wrong is not letting the data speak and sort of just going on the basis of gut or somebody's, you know, maybe it's an ego trip or something. They've got an idea. They think that's the one that's going to win. We always found that the more successful businesses actually had the appropriate observability metrics, information that they could then process to make something that was genuinely in the direction that their customer was looking for.
Good. Well, the point around data is a huge one, and we'll definitely come back to that because it's hard to talk about customer obsession without talking about data. So we'll unpack that later. Sure. But you guys have touched on, you know, the role that your organizations have played, or in the case of your clients, in driving that company-wide orientation around the customer. Do you feel your teams, how much did you drive versus how much were you adapting to a broader strategy? And how did you lead if that was in fact a leadership role?
In the adoption of the cloud?
Or in sort of being truly customer obsessed.
Yeah. So I guess maybe if you understand what our business is, it kind of helps explain some of that, right? So what we do is our team sits, as I mentioned, we sit in the process or with the direct insurers. We help them evaluate applicants for life insurance, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you bought life insurance 20 years ago, like I did, it was a 3 or 4 week process. But nobody wants to wait 3 or 4 weeks for it anymore. You expect it to happen instantaneously, right? And so that's actually what our systems do, right? When somebody is out applying for life insurance, there's a good chance that when you hit the submit button, it's going to go to our system on the back end, and we're going to provide that information back. And in the course of that, right, we're going to pull data sources from everywhere. We're do all this complicated algorithmic manipulation of the data and recommend back, but it has to happen quickly. And so at the end of the day, right, it's whether we make that recommendation appropriately and whether it happens at a speed that is what the customer expects. I mean, those are very real metrics for us. So it's really easy for us, I think, in some ways to understand that. But it does start with making, you've got to make sure that's what we're providing. We're providing the excellent decision. We're providing it really quickly. And we know that. And so those metrics are simple.
I have a kind of a follow-up question. So how much has that changed over time? Because you said it used to take, like you said, multiple days, maybe a week to get that information back. Now it's expected in what? Like, how long does it take?
Oh, most of our decisions are rendered in less than a minute. Yeah. And that includes going out and pulling lots of different data sources, right? So, when you apply for life insurance in the U.S., you give a authorization to pull different types of data sources. So, from the time you hit submit to the time they get back an answer, we're going to go out. We pull the motor vehicle records potentially. We pull prescription drug history, we pull criminal history, depending on what the direct insurer is looking for.
Right.
And we can analyze all that data and then provide it back very quickly.
Less than a minute, like that's special, yeah. And do you think that that's going to get even faster? Like, what's the expectation there?
I think actually, yeah. So some of the stuff we're looking at now is can we make it faster? Can we get by with less information? Especially if we can start asking or start processing some of the information sooner in the application process, right? So if for example, I mentioned all the data sources that we pulled just a minute ago. If for example, after you tell me your name and date of birth and where you live, I can go and run a machine learning model. It doesn't exist yet for us, but it's something that we're considering. And look and see if I have sufficient information just based on what I can pull for you, right? So if I can pull your prescription drug history, you have a well-documented history and you're healthy, and you have a well-documented motor vehicle record, but you're not a bad driver and you don't have a criminal history, right? I don't need to ask you any more questions.
Right.
At that point, we know you're probably a good risk.
Short circuit that, yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And Christina, you talked a lot about the work you do to empower your employees to contribute to that agenda of sort of customer obsession and innovation. What has worked for you?
The interesting thing is that this company was in the cloud for a long time before they actually had a cloud team. Right. So
anybody else going through that experience?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting tactic to take. So I think initially, as this cloud team was built, first of all, they were built before I was here. So I didn't, I kind of was able to walk into a situation and go, I don't know what this is going to look like because I don't know what their experience is or anything. And I'm not just saying this because they're here, but they are amazing. Our leaders, the managers under me are very good leaders, but the big thing that they've really had to do is kind of sell themselves and kind of build trust and develop trust in the organization. And you're working for a company where there's, it's a very segregated business versus IT. Yeah. And there's not, the partnership hasn't really been there. But the cloud team has a very good reputation because there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of the ability to kind of wanted to continue to grow and innovate. And one of the things that I think my managers have done really well and that I've kind of continued to perpetuate is I want them to be able to do the things that are going to help develop them. And if they're working on something, if they come up with an idea of we need to solve this, or we should be doing this better, or let's change the network this way, or let's evolve this solution, if they're coming up with these ideas, it's helping me as and helping the organization, but it's also helping their development. And so really thinking about being innovative is not just about it's also keeping your employees happy. Like you want your team to continue to work for you. They're not going to want to keep working for you if you're kind of putting your thumb down and going, you can't do any of these things. If they're, especially like on my team, they're coming to me with ideas that don't cost me anything. It's really them kind of driving those costs down by being innovative and saying, hey, we can get rid of these 4 things by automating this, and that's gonna improve our costs, and I might need to take a little training to do that, or I might need to take a little time to develop it. You want them to do that. Like I want them to do that for themselves, and I want them to do it for me. Like it makes everybody look good, and it's good for the business. And as somebody who, is coming into a situation where there is that a bit of a segregation, I have to do making a lot of friends, and I have to, like, in order to make friends in your organization, you have to establish trust. And to establish trust, you have to sometimes do things that maybe fall outside of your job description and say, yeah, I'll figure out how to get this done, and my team is very good at figuring out how to get things done. And I think I've been very lucky in that way. But I will always encourage them to keep developing and training and growing because it's good for them, it's good for everybody, and I want them to stay. Like, please stay.
And Jeremy, for you, because you've been there longer, how have you helped your team maybe expand around their typical IT role? Like, have you had to help them build those bridges and kind of achieve the same swagger internally?
Well, so for us, we're in a slightly different position because we're part of a business unit, a for-profit business unit, so we're not part of corporate IT.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, and the team is everything, right? I mean, the technologies come and go, but what that happens, that process I described earlier, that is really with a team.
Yeah.
The tools they do it, they could do it. They're doing it in Java now. They could do it in something else down the road. They could have been doing it something previously. That's always going to change. So really, you have to keep investing. I think it's vital that you continue to invest in people and give them those opportunities to try new things and to succeed. Innovation is. Sure, it can be a top-down thing, but really when it's done best and it's really embraced most, I think, strongly within an organization, it's coming from the bottom up. And it's a culture of innovation that is there. It's the willingness, the ability to try things. And also the ability to not succeed at some things too, right? In the past, we've been in a place where we didn't, failure wasn't an option, and failure is not really an option for us now, but we have ways that we can test things and we can explore things now. In the past, the development teams were scared to try new things, and so they weren't contributing ideas. They were just taking what was being given to them and doing those things. Now we're asking them to contribute the ideas to try new things, and they're doing it. And not everything works, but we're getting a lot more out of it. We're getting a lot more investment out of it, and frankly, I think that they're probably happier than I've ever seen them in the 7 years that I've been there. Because they're also getting a chance to work on stuff, and they feel the investment, in them.
That's tremendous.
I think that's a great point to make too, is that you're allowing them to be able to feel safe to fail, right? I think that's a really important thing to note, because if people have the ability to say, I'm going to try this, I'm going to do my best and I want to deliver something, and they know that, if it doesn't work out exactly the way that they need to, it's not like we're firing you.
Right.
It's, they're having the ability to say, I trust you, and I know, and I believe in your intent. And if you believe in what the people are doing and you believe in their intent, then and you kind of continue to show that and prove that to them, and it creates a good culture for your organization as a whole. If you're letting people know that it's okay to be human.
Yeah. Well, and Vish, I'd be curious, one of the main reasons we created Ollion was we were hearing very clearly from clients and those in the market that they wanted consultants and companies that could come alongside and uplift and enable their people versus these great firms that can come in and do and then kind of disappear. But I'm curious, how has that played out tangibly? How do you help clients achieve this that are further along?
I mean, the points that Jeremy and Christina made, that's perfect, in terms of the way that you should be approaching the problem. What we've seen is when organizations sort of get over that initial distinction that they make between the business and the technology, really the most value that we can get from the cloud is when you blend those two things. But that requires an entirely different skill set. That's not something that most folks from either camp really understand and are able to blend well together. So what we've taken to doing is creating co-innovation pods, where there's always business stakeholders. They have to be a part of that conversation because they ultimately have an idea, a lens on how both the business perceives the customer and the customer perceives the business. And usually that's sort of disjointed from the technology. But really, when you start consuming technology in that fashion and bringing that to the fore, it really changes how much acceleration, how much value you start getting out of this. In this particular case, like, from this perspective of Score is it's a digital company, right? I mean, the value that you're delivering is very much happening over the wire. Rockwell's still, it's atoms, right? You're dealing with stuff that's physically in things.
Yeah.
And that's a very different, because it's disconnected from the value, right? So the IT function becomes one by default of supporting those devices out in the field. It's a lot harder to tie those two things together. But I think that the closer those two elements become, the more value Rockwell will get out of the cloud and in general out of technology for their customer.
I think that too, I would say, like, listening to your business. I think there's a lot of like understanding and listening to what the business actually wants. 'Cause there's a lot of the ability to say, like, I want this outcome. They don't actually know all the other ways to kind of get there. And if you really don't understand where they're trying to go, it makes it difficult to build the right solution.
Yeah.
So really ensuring that you're building the right partnership and that you're saying, let's work together. And I really like what you said about kind of building something so that, these people aren't just sweeping in and fixing something and then going away. Yeah. It's really like you're enabling your technology teams and your partners that you're working with to be able to manage what you're building when you leave, and when you're able to, and that enables you as a partner to be able to go to work on something else for them, and know that this is being handled the right way, and that you can continue to enable the business in other ways. So that's a really good point. I really like that a lot.
It's all about kind of creating a mechanism that allows that information to flow freely, and to really get on the same page, because oftentimes, speaking as a technologist, we are guilty of just, chasing the new shiny thing sometimes. But the reality is that if there's no business value at the end of that, then it's really difficult in the long run to really generate value that your client or the customer sees over an extended period of time. It really needs to move the needle in terms of giving them something of value. And in some cases, it's just, doing things faster, making it more efficient. But in other cases, it's brand new features, entire platforms that they may not have had before. And that's really where it starts getting exciting. Yeah. And I think that some of the new stuff that's happening with, dare I say it, Gen AI, is really kind of pushing the envelope on what's possible there.
Yeah. Well, maybe one more question on this, and then we do want to pivot to Gen AI. You guys have taken different approaches with your company around seeking to create that innovation and that customer obsession purely internally or organically, or also looking inorganic. Like, you guys have done some acquisitions to sort of bring some of that in. Like, what is the right balance, or how did you make that choice to not only do internal but external acquisition, inorganic as well?
The acquisitions is interesting because Rockwell likes to buy companies, and we might be buying a company right now, I don't know, but we've definitely bought, there's been a few acquisitions over the last few months, and really, there's reasons why. There's strategic reasons as to why we're acquiring these businesses and trying to figure out, okay, what are they doing? How do we integrate what they're doing with what we have? How do we integrate them with, how do we actually maybe leverage what their skill sets are to evolve some of the technology we have today, and making sure we're building the right partnerships across them. And that has been, a little bit of a challenge. Something that I have been working towards a lot is how do we meeting with these acquisition teams and saying, all right, well, what do you do? How are you doing it? How can we help? What's our ability to partner? How can we, help work together on this a little bit more? And also, I think when you look at companies, if you acquire a business, there are the things that you do to them, right? Like, you're telling them, all right, now you need to be on this version of Outlook, and you need new laptops, and you need all these things, and we need to change your network, and all of these things that have to happen. And then there's the things that you do for them. Like, if you're a big organization, you're going to have bigger discounts with some of your providers. You're going to have a bunch more vendors that you're working with, and access to a bunch of different things, that different levels of support that these smaller companies don't have. And then there are the things that we can do together. And I think really it's getting some of those, the first two out of the way so you can start making progress together, because those acquisition teams are working a lot. So those companies we've acquired are working a lot with some of our direct customers that have impact to things that we don't necessarily have impact to. They have skill sets that we don't necessarily have. And then we also have skill sets that they don't have.
Right.
And how do we make sure that we're building the right harmony and partnership there? And it's a lot of work to do that. But I think that's really, for me, it's very enjoyable because I like seeing the different technology and the different things people are doing. And I want to be able to grow, and I think it helps me develop my skills, it will help my team develop, it will help their teams develop, so it's looking at that in the right way.
So on that note, getting into some of the newer forms, whether it's AI, Gen AI, machine learning, oh my, what are some of the things that you guys are looking at? Like you started to look at some of this stuff already within the context.
Yeah, no, so obviously, what we do is we try to predict the future. So this is very, very, all of these are very germane to us. I think machine learning has been something that we've been working on and some sort of fairly, simplistic models, I guess. To a degree for some period of time, but we're really excited about the opportunities that AI it brings to the table. The challenge we see is observability because we're such a heavily regulated industry. We have regulators in all 50 states and they vary a little bit. So, being able to say why somebody was denied a policy, for example, is very difficult with some of the AI models that exist today. But that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. And there's also a lot of stuff that we can still do from a machine learning perspective too. It doesn't all have to be, these massively complicated models. It can be just, 10 or 12 different things that can really tell us a lot of information and a lot of predictive value. So I think it's going to be exciting to see where it goes. I think that there's also places where it does play in, maybe not necessarily in the initial application process. So for example, in the claims management or customer service, there's definitely a lot of opportunities to help out with that stuff.
Yeah. And Vish, what about you across your client base? What are you seeing in terms of what are people keen to explore?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different use cases that we've identified that I think they're driving towards a position where significant numbers of menial tasks are just sort of taken off the map. They're not going to be done in the future by humans. And the responses will be quicker, and frankly, I think that the user experience is going to be significantly better. Where we've seen a really interesting use just in the software that we've been building is we've been able to take, there's a product that we've been building that allows us to rapidly map together all the different compliances that a regulated industry has. And that includes things like what the compliance frameworks might be that they're using, but also what the regulators are asking for. And then combining that with their own unique policy that they've written for themselves. Usually connecting those dots is really hard, but it turns out that these LLMs are actually really good at understanding the gist of what that English sentence means when a regulator writes something. And it's kept, what we've discovered is that it's kept willfully sort of vague. They've made that choice that they're not going to be prescriptive about how you do those things. It's like, you need to secure your servers, right? But they won't tell you how.
Right.
That's your policy, right? So mapping what you've come up with as a way to do that to what that compliance framework might have, and then from there over to the regulator. Doing that with these LLMs has been absolutely fascinating to see how quickly they're able to map those things together and then create a graph, and then that allows us to do things like find evidence for a particular regulator when they ask us, the audit happens, and we can find that piece of evidence really, really quickly. So unexpectedly, that's a place that you can use this stuff. So it's everywhere. The applications are endless, and I think that actually comes back to that concept of co-innovation and really using the business knowledge, but applying the technology lens on top of it, because there's so much stuff that we are trying to figure out right now. It's so nascent. Nobody really knows what the killer app is for that particular industry yet.
Right.
But the co-innovation is key, because you had mentioned with that particular product you're talking about, you're co-innovating that with two global organizations to sort of in a very highly regulated industry.
Yeah, so this is in financial services in Singapore. We're working with some very large multinational banks. The regulations that they have to comply with are genuinely complicated because they're multi-currency accounts, there's cross-border transactions, there's multiple regulators' requirements that need to be fulfilled for a single transaction, and that just adds to it's hard enough to run a bank from a regulator's perspective, right? Like, this makes it much, much harder. And as you guys know, there's lots of countries in Southeast Asia, so it's really fragmented. And most of these banks, for them to get to a certain scale, they have to operate in multiple geographies. Right. So it's actually a common problem for regional banks.
Yeah.
And the hope is that this will significantly reduce the amount of effort that they have to put in, both from the perspective of knowing what their requirements are from a regulation perspective, but also being able to reuse evidence.
Yeah.
So it turns out that it's the same server that's running the code. So you need to be able to answer the same question from this regulator and that regulator in different countries. But really, they're asking the same question. So as long as you can map the piece of evidence to both of them, you only need to store that evidence and run that control once. And right now, that's being done for every single one of these countries. So huge savings, hopefully a significant amount of, frankly, really boring work should go away.
Good. And Christina, we heard a lot, I'm even thinking back to like the AWS Partner Summit. They talked about how every conversation, whether it was intentional or not, was turning to Gen AI, and every conversation around Gen AI was inherently turning into a data conversation. Like, I'm curious, like, true or false, and what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that it's definitely, I think that also if you look at most organizations have tons and tons of data on tons of different things. And how do we leverage it? Are we leveraging it the right way? Do we, are we creating the right visibility and observability by using the data? Are we being more predictive at like what's gonna break and being able to provide maintenance for things? Because there's data, but are we doing the work with it? I think there's there's definitely a lot to be done there. And I also think that, there's so much potential to do good things if we can really get in and analyze what's going on. And with just the stuff that we have today, and obviously, that's going to still accumulate, right? I feel like we don't ever stop accumulating data. What we do with it at the end of the day is really the interesting task.
We've had to get smarter about how we do some data, or how we handle some of our customer agreements on the front end. Because again, we're in reinsurance, we're a global company as well, so we have data sovereignty issues. We have all sorts of different privacy issues from company to company, and these sorts of things, right? So we've even started now when we go to do business with a new company, we've changed our agreement so that we can do things with the data now that we didn't used to be allowed to do. At least we can maybe from a pseudonymization perspective, we can still do analysis on it. But we've got in some of our customer agreements, our existing legacy customer agreements, where we can't use one customer's business or information to improve another customer's book of business, which I get. Yeah. But there's other things to be unlocked in that. There's not just the book of business, but there's our business is what's killing people. There's other things that we can learn from that might be more meaningful than somebody than a company doing something or having a good quarter.
Yeah.
And it's one thing too to be talking about being customer obsessed and innovative in times of good, but now the economic climate has obviously shifted. Companies are having to do, I think, as you said, like more with less. How has that impacted your ability to be customer obsessed? Like, does that take a back seat?
No, I mean, I don't think you can't let it take a back seat, because as soon as you let it take a back seat, your customers are your customers for a reason. And if you let it take a back seat, then they're going to go be somebody else's customers. And at that point, you've lost your business. So I don't think, even when you've got to do things with less, you've got to figure out new ways to do things. You can't just stop doing stuff. And you can't just stop, we can't just stop engaging with our customers and try to make sure that we're meeting their needs and doing all these other things. You can't. In fact, we've got to do it even more now when times are tight, because they have more options too than they used to have too. So I don't think you just have to find new ways to do it. You have to figure out ways that you can if you have force multipliers like Gen AI, you can take some customer contact stuff off or some of those types of things.
And Christina, I was struck by something you had said in one of our conversations about making prudent financial decisions doesn't mean being strategically undaring. And I loved that quote, by the way. But explain kind of what that means and how you actually make that happen.
I think that you just have to be really creative I think that that's one thing that they don't really look, when you look at IT, you're not like, oh, they're very creatively solving these things. Because it's very like, we're all hands on keyboard, everybody's got to be an engineer, everybody's got to learn to code. But there are a lot of times where you're presented with we all want to do the happy path. We all want to make sure we have a buffer of time. We have a buffer. We have extra money for this, but that's not really the reality, right? We know that something else is going to come up that's going to be a priority, and this money that you're counting on for this is actually going to have to go to something else. And if this and really in the fly, you have to be like, okay, well, if I don't have this funds and I can't use this and I have to do this, how am I going to solve this problem? And we all have to kind of be more creative in order to do that. And really think about what's the outcome. So what am I driving towards? And as long as I can drive towards this, and sometimes I got to zigzag and go a different way, but I can still get there, I think that's really the goal. And I think that creativity, is something that, it cannot be discounted, because we all have to do it, whether we like it or not. We sometimes have to make sacrifices on things that we don't want to, but it's all at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that our business is getting what they need.
And you tend to encounter more internal naysayers, but was there a moment that you started to naysay, that you doubted something that you guys were embarking upon?
I am always a little bit of I like to be cautiously optimistic. I want sunshine and rainbows all the time. I feel like that'd be great, but we just all know that doesn't happen. So I'm very grounded in reality, and I think sometimes with being grounded in reality, I think I a little bit expect the worst and hope for the best, which is maybe not the best way to approach things, but I think that's just the way that I look at stuff, is like you don't always know. And if you're planning for the worst things to happen, you're always pleasantly surprised when things go better than you thought. So for me, I think it works out well to operate that way, and hopefully it works out for my team that way too.
What do you guys say? And Vish, what about you? As you think about just client base broadly, where have people started to hone in or crystallize if they're trying to be a little bit more financially prudent?
Well, I think we've had some success with cloud economics in general, and what strikes you when you look at the entire IT estate, especially when a lot of folks just kind of migrated, they lifted and shifted, they moved into the cloud. You ended up with a whole bunch of infrastructure that sort of mimicked what you used to have in the data center. Never really took the trouble to refactor, to change the underlying engine that was running on this, or running this stuff, to get the value out of these systems that we now have. A lot of it really just boils down to waste, that you could do a lot better with that budget. And what we found is whenever we do those kind of exercises where we go in and we'll refactor an application, modernize it, bring it into what we'd call cloud native mode, you end up getting a whole bunch of budget back. And what tends to happen is that application is working just fine. In many cases, it improves, right? The performance characteristics, all of that stuff changes because you've now made it fit for purpose. And I know that the crowd doesn't really care about the technology here, but that's a technology outcome. That's not really a business outcome yet. And at that point in time when you have that budget back, I think that's when you have the luxury, because it's already in your plan, right? You already expected to spend that money. That's when you can really start innovating. So I like to think of that kind of exercise as, rather than being just a pure cost out exercise, as being buying yourself a little elbow room.
Yeah, space.
Yeah.
You kind of have to box out, some of that stuff.
Well, sometimes you have to do that too, yeah. So
Yeah.
Defend your turf, defend your team, make sure that they're only taking on the work that's really important. But the modernization piece is, I think that's a journey that we're embarking on right now with our core business applications, and it's I don't know that we're going to see a tremendous difference from an operating cost perspective, but where we're really there's two places where we see it is the ongoing maintainability of the application,
yeah, that's huge.
The ability for us to innovate on the application, and also the ability for us to develop our developers, bring them along in the journey, right?
Yeah.
Because they've been working on the same old application just like we all have. And they're developers. I mean, we're all nerds. They want to do new stuff. They want to grow and develop too. So this is an opportunity for that as well.
Totally, and I think that that's a really important and often overlooked angle, which is that it's a massive uplift for the team. Because everybody, we've spoken about how everyone wants to kind of work on the shiny new thing.
Yeah.
Some of those things are actually valuable and have reached a stage where they're actually transforming other businesses. What you want is you want to attract that talent, you want to uplift your existing talent, you want to be able to play in that space, because ultimately the time marches on. These things don't usually go backwards. There's never, I'm not hearing too many stories of people leaving the cloud, right?
Right.
So this is obviously a one-way street. We should be talking about the technologies that the cloud has allowed us to consume at scale, but it has to be fit for purpose. It's only when it makes sense. There are some applications that should never leave VMs. That's the truth, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of be able to look at that IT estate, evaluate it, and then make the right choices, and that's very strategic.
Well, maybe one more question, then we'll open it up. But it is interesting that we're talking about being customer obsessed and innovative with two kind of industries that you guys said yourselves aren't traditionally known for that, whether it's highly regulated insurance, heavy manufacturing. You've worked a lot with the digital natives. Or some of the unicorns. Is that an advantage now, or are there lessons to be learned?
We found that the lessons that we learned when working with those modern businesses have been sought after really by the enterprise, because they kind of want to capture some of that magic in many cases. Now, granted, that was at a different time where capital was flowing freely.
Right.
And times have changed and the belt has definitely been tightened. I think a lot of those businesses are facing some significant headwinds now because, profitability is the key, the name of the game right now.
Yeah.
That being said, there are some ways that they think about innovation and the way that they process that information that they're getting back from their applications that I think applies to any business. The ability to rapidly iterate, building platform engineering as a thing inside of your organization, empowering developers to be able to consume the cloud as and when they want on their own terms without necessarily involving, several layers of bureaucracy. Yeah. Those are all really, really valuable lessons to be learned. Now, you have to be able to ring fence it. You have to be able to sort of make sure that, because startups aren't heavily regulated, so it's easy for them to break things and sort of just get a slap on the wrist. I would assume that SCORE would have a harder time with that.
Yeah, I would have to write some letters.
But I mean, that's where you kind of build a platform that allows folks to, within the bounds of what you're allowed to do, with compliance sort of guaranteed, consume cloud resources at a developer level, and to empower that sort of experimentation that we were talking about earlier. It kind of creates a safe space in the cloud for that to happen, not just a psychologically safe space, but also like a physically something that they can't break.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a breach if there's a problem.
Exactly. You're not going to get a phone call at 3 a.m. Yeah.
Good. Well, so good lessons across the board. I'm cognizant that we are standing in the way of lunch, but what questions do you guys have? I'd love to hear anything. Any questions for the panelists? Any of that nitty-gritty tech stuff you want to hear?
I would say that, one of the things that I think is this organization, Rockwell, has done well is that we've been around for 120 years. And you continually have to evolve, right? Mm-hmm. The amount of things that a company that has been around that long has had to do to kind of reinvent themselves over and over again. Oh, yeah. And I think that's, kind of an advantage we have is that we've done it, we know how to do it, and we'll keep kind of driving towards all right, well, if this isn't working, we can pivot here. And a lot of those decisions we've made about some of the acquisitions that we had have really been focused on, all right, well, what does our customer need? What is our, and at the end of the day, what does our customer need, and how do we make sure we're getting that to them? And that's not always easy, but I do think that's definitely an important part of us being able to evolve.
Mm-hmm. You guys must. We talked about this on a telephone call a while back. It's like you guys have an innovation mindset. You have to last for 120 years. You've got to continually be reinventing yourself. Yeah. And that's the course of the case with anything, especially in technology. We're going through a phase of that ourselves right now. We're working with, we're working on the retooling the team, modernizing the application. And really preparing, we've been in the cloud since 2014. We've been around for a long time, but we're getting ready for the next 12, 13, 14 years.
Good. Anything else? Okay, good. Well, thanks, you guys. We will have more time with them. If you're interested in hearing just more on these topics, by all means, please stop by. We're happy to talk more about this journey toward customer obsession. There's also some good content to be had around migration, modernization, AI, some new offerings around AI and generative AI. Both Christina and Jeremy will be at the booth around 4 o'clock today if you are interested in exploring any of this stuff further with them and some of their learnings. But this has been tremendously insightful. Thanks, you guys. Really hearing these learnings and experiences across the boards is key. So thank you guys for your time and enjoy lunch and the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.